I guess you want to approve the minutes of the last meeting?
Fine with me.
Okay, so moved, approved, okay. Presentation of city audit ending March 31st, 2019. You're up.
Great, thank you so much for having us. My name is Jeff Kowalczyk. I'm a partner with Barbicane Thornton and Company. With me is Pam Baker, our managing partner. And we're delighted to be here today to present the results of our audit for the year ended March 31st, 2019. Our audit consisted not just of testing transactions, but also of testing the controls that underlie the city's operations as a basis for understanding whether the financial statements are fairly presented. Additionally, because you expended more than $750,000 in money that started with the federal government, you are subject to the Single Audit Act, so we performed additional compliance and controls testing in accordance with that act and with uniform guidance.
Next question.
Absolutely.
Have you ever considered like a separate internal control review from the audit that then ties into the audit?
It's certainly something that could be done. It's not something that in the government sector we see a lot of, because the controls, the main controls that underlie the financial statements are the same key controls that are ongoing throughout the year. There are some other opportunities. There's service organization control reports that are done by some entities, which is just a test of the internal control operating efficiency, and specifically opines on that. That's more commonly done by entities that serve other entities, as opposed to entities that serve the public. But it's certainly something that could be explored and could be an opportunity to provide an additional level of comfort to the citizens or to you as a committee.
What I was getting at is it comes in with a more in-depth look at the controls and looking at what could be improved, not so much for...
Sorry, so the public can hear? We can just speak into this? We're on live TV also.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
The question, I guess, is where that would show up is where you can make improvements in the structure, either in technology or that type of thing, as opposed to the audit, which in the work you're doing here is just to make sure that I'm not minimizing it,
Right.
but it's to make sure that the financial statements present fairly the financial position of the whatever you're doing.
Right.
And the specific, and Jay, you can tie in on this, is I know 2 years ago when the country club switched and got into this, I mean, it was revolutionary in terms of the savings they get. It's not, I'm not talking about straight internal control like you would do.
Right.
Pardon me?
Right. Kind of an efficiency audit. Is that part
Well, it's
of it?
internal control, internal control,
Right.
internal check tied into the efficiency and use of technology.
Right.
One of the things that we're seeing in our industry right now is the term is going from compliance to advisory, looking at the fact that independent audits, financial statement, comfort level, those types of things, our world's moving so fast and technology is creating so many opportunities to make things more secure around financial controls that the future is going to be more along the lines of probably something like you're talking about. Let's look a little bit more at advisory type services. So it's not the same level of assurance that an audit is, but it is more advisory in that you're looking at what's happening before it gets to this level, maybe in a little bit more.
Where I've seen it done is it actually cuts down on the audit time because of the fact that it's tied into the audit. But and where I've seen it done, and I've seen it done 4 or 5 times now, it really is, it's been very helpful, put it that way.
And it is definitely where our industry is moving, without a doubt. So you do it, some people call it continuous auditing. That's another term that's sometimes used to describe that, because you're not waiting until the year's over and then we're coming back and it's historical in nature, but you're really looking at things as they happen throughout the course of the year. And therefore you can pivot or make changes or help to give recommendations to management so that they can, design things a little bit more quickly, if nothing else, and efficient.
Back in the dark ages when I worked in the accounting business, we used to do a preliminary and then a final after the year end. And the preliminary is where, when I've seen it done, this is where this is done. We have it done in our trust company every year.
Yeah.
And number one, it levels out the workload for the internal staff, but I mean, it really has come up with some, I don't know if there's anything wrong with it. I mean, it just has come up with some great ideas and that were implemented and saved substantial money.
Absolutely, and I think especially now that the city is getting to the end of the implementation of the Munis system, which was a time when internal controls were changing every 3 to 5 months as new parts of the system went online. Now that we're getting to the end of that process, this could be a great time to look at that, say, where do we end up? Where do we have opportunities to improve?
Another question is, and then I'll let everybody else talk.
Yeah.
My other question is, I mentioned this with Jay the other day. The year ends of March.
Yes.
We're in October.
Right.
What do you do to bring forward to the date from date of end of field work to the date of the I guess to when the statements are done?
Right. So there's a number of things we do. So to give you kind of an idea of our timeline this year, the primary field work was performed in June. And then when we left, there were a few items open, primarily some work with fixed assets and with accounts receivable. Those items were completed and provided to us in late August, early September. So at that point, we made sure that all our testing for the fiscal year we were comfortable with. And then for the period subsequent to the fiscal year, we did a sampling testing of receipts and disbursements to ensure they were in the correct accounting period. We do follow up with legal counsel to ensure that no subsequent activities have occurred which would have an impact on the financial statements. I read newspapers to see if there's anything going on. That's not an official audit procedure, but it's something that I think is probably more valuable than some of the official audit procedures. We also read minutes subsequent to the report date, and then we sample other transactions and journal entries and inquire of management to get an understanding of anything that's happened from April 1st through the report date to make sure that it is appropriately reflected back to March 31st.
The thing doesn't the, and again, my knowledge is dated, so this is not being very dated, okay? Isn't the date of the report the date of completion of field work?
It is no longer the date of completion of field work. It's now the date that the report is available to be issued. The date of completion of field work remains the report date for compilation procedures, and for review procedures, it was until about 2 years, and now they've moved that back to the audit timeline. So slowly, they're kind of moving everyone out further.
And it does put a little more burden on you trying to, that you can't have that stop date, but until you release it, you have to continuously do those procedures.
Absolutely, thank you. That was a great question.
All done? Didn't even start, go ahead.
Yeah. Did you have anything preliminarily, or do you want me to jump in?
Go ahead and present your report.
Okay, perfect. So pages 1, 2, and 3 of the report are our report on the financial statements and our report on the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. These reports identify that management's responsible for the maintenance of records and preparation of these financial statements, and our responsibility is to opine on whether or not they are fairly presented based on our audit testing. I'm pleased to report, and it's at the top-ish of page 2, that we found the financial statements to be fairly presented. We also we also issued an unmodified or clean opinion on the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. Towards the end of the financial reporting packet, we have our separate reports on an audit in accordance with government auditing standards, as well as our report on compliance with the uniform guidance. So I'll touch on them then. But the report right here on pages 1 through 3, clean all the way across. One thing to note on page 2, this year was the year that the city implemented Government Accounting Standards Board Statement number 75, which modified the reporting for other post-employment benefit plans. Historically, a small portion of the liability was incrementally recognized at the entity-wide level. So you have a post-employment healthcare plan that's maybe about $5 million liability, actuarially determined. That historically had to be recognized over a 30-year period. So each year you would recognize an additional 1/30th of that. The new standards said we got to put it all on the face of the financial statements right away. They also changed some of the stuff on the actuarial side, so the numbers actually grew a little bit from what they'd historically been. So you'll see a new liability, and then that's what it is this year. Pages 4 through, let's say 13, are management's discussion and analysis. This section's not audited, but we do read through to make sure that it's materially consistent with the financial statements themselves, and also that they include all of the required elements and also don't have any extraneous or clearly false information included in the management's discussion and analysis. This is the area I always push the public to read because it's the plain English part of the financial statements. Then pages 14 and 15 are where we get into the financial numbers. The first two statements are at the entity-wide level. So everything at the entity-wide level is full accrual, similar to how a business operates, meaning all long-term assets and all long-term liabilities are fully reflected. This year, you'll see at the end of the year, the city's total net position was $55.6 million. That was a decrease from $57.1 million the prior year. And I can tell you that that was primarily driven by depreciation expense, because you'll see at the fund level that there were increases.
How much of the budget's been growing year to year? How much had the budget's been growing from year to year?
Well, grown fairly significantly over the last 5 years. I mean, when I got here in, say, 2008, we were running about $10 million budget. Now we're, in the 20s. So it's a lot bigger. I mean, you've got, of course, in your enterprise funds, you've got the outfall piece, and so that grows your capital budget significantly. But I mean, our capital budget historically was in the $1 to $2 million area, so it's increased. The current year budget's almost $4 million, and the commissioner's feeling was that there were some things in the city streets and storm drainage, different other things relating to city infrastructure that we needed to spend money on. So they voted to spend the money, and I offered options on revenue increases that would be required to support that, and they elected to put that revenue in place and spend that money. So it's I'd say it's fairly, I think significant is probably the word. It's great.
Is there like an end date to the, do you know, an end date to the large increases? I understand the ocean outfall, I understand the capital projects, that's my point, but it seems to me that we just have a significant increase. I'm not saying it's not justified, I'm simply saying we have a significant increase in the budget each year. Is there any planning looking out 4 or 5 years to see how this all levels out and where the revenue comes from?
And I would say, with an increase, some of that is likely related to efficiencies, and you would think efficiencies would be decreasing the budget, but we had a major 3.5 year now implementation of the Munis new financial software package, which is in and of itself an expensive endeavor, but it's also bringing efficiency to all departments, not just the finance department. So with that comes staffing issues and increased staff, but we're into the 21st century now, well into the next tasks of what's needed for the city, and not only City Hall and the Ocean Outfall Project, of course, the two big capital projects the city has embarked upon in the last 6-7 years. We have increased expenses, just like everyone's normal budget in their own home.
And it may help if we skip ahead to pages 48 and 49 of the report. This is the general fund budget versus actual one-year snapshot. So when we're talking about a $20 million plus budget, you'll see that our revenue and expenditure budget in the general fund for the year were about 13.8 million in revenues and 14.8 million in expenses, in expenditures for the year ended March 31st, 2019. You'll additionally see in the middle of page 49 that total expenditures for the year actually came in about $1 million below where it was budgeted. And there were a variety of reasons for that. One is that capital outlays were less than anticipated originally. That often is just timing between fiscal years, and also just taking a hard look at exactly what projects we're going to do now and how they line up with our multi-year plan. So you'll see where the city had anticipated to need to transfer in $1 million to balance its general fund budget. They were actually able to run a surplus of about $1.25 million this year in the general fund.
Which is a very big change from when we began working with the city. The general fund was every single year could not balance without transfers in from the proprietary operations. And so there has been a lot of change in structure as well as change in sort of how things are accounted for and the communication to the commissioners when they're preparing a budget, right? I mean, the talk became slowly, increasingly more to the point. The general fund needs to live on the general fund, and the proprietary funds need to live on those funds. And, that's just not the way it had been done for a number of years. And so now you really have a true and good picture of what, to your point, now you have better trend. You can really see general government operations, what's going to happen there, and you can trend that number out. The proprietary operations, your business type activities, are always going to have fluctuations, more along capital, because they're capital intensive and you can't deliver service without the capital. And two, from a rate setting perspective, what do people consume versus what you have available to be consumed. And so there's such completely different types of operations that I think the city's done a tremendous job at getting to the point where now we know, governmental operations, proprietary operations.
I agree with you. My question still comes down back to, and this is not any, I agree with you totally. It's amazing the changes have been made. Okay, so I'm not disagreeing with that at all. My question, I guess, is, I think is if you project out 5 years, assume you isolate your general fund and you can't get money from any place else. And the things you want to do within the general fund, is it projected out so that you know what it's going to take to do that, assuming that's your goal, continuing goal?
Well, yeah, I think you made a good observation in the sense that on the revenue side, we've really taken some dramatic steps to improve the revenue picture. We've increased your property taxes by 50%. We've doubled the rental tax by 100%, from 3% to 6%. We've been very fortunate on the transfer tax because it's been rolling in, and we all know, we've been around here long enough to know that's
goes up and down like a yo-yo.
When Barbara King first got here, I think that was about the time we'd gone from over $2 million down to about 900,000, and everybody was very concerned. Well, the transfer tax piece was a big part of it. So, if you want to talk about a risk, I would say the interesting thing about Rehoboth, there's good and bad on the revenue side. The good is that the property taxes are a very small percentage of the total revenue. In most cities, there may be 40, 50, maybe 60%. I'm not really, in Rehoboth, we've got all these user fees. That being said, though, that puts us in a more cyclical revenue situation. You have some rainy weekends on your parking revenue, all those things. So the taxpayers get relief from all these user fees, but at the same time, there's a little more risk inherent there. So, you know, I think going forward, just as long as you're mindful of that, and I think what can we do as managers? I think one of the things we can do is not budget or transfer tax too aggressively, because we took $2 million in this year. We budgeted 1.4. Well, if I budgeted $2 million, we would have spent, you know, an extra 600,000. And so, you know, I think conservative revenue projections help.
We never established a rainy day fund, have we, ever?
Never. And the one thing that we've got to do, the closest thing to a rainy day fund, we had this rate study that you've all heard about on the water and sewer. And basically the bottom line is we're going to have a period going into the 2021, 22, 23 period where you're going to have a big increase in capital outlays.
Well, the problem is you're tapped on borrowing.
Well, because we're going to probably be very close to our debt limit of $75 million.
Yeah.
This rate study presented a scenario where we're going to have to go ahead and collect that money through rate increases. So the strategy was, if you want to call it that, was we're going to raise a little more revenue from the sewer in the early years. And this is the point about the rainy day fund. We're going to raise more revenue than we really need to cover those costs, because when we hit that period where everything's going to go up, we can't go out and borrow the money. So we're going to have to go ahead and you know, I think segregate funds actually, you know, put aside solid cash aside, not just put a restriction in the fund balance. Or I think so.
You're talking about the operation of it or the bond?
I'm talking not so much the debt. I'm talking really about, they've got about, I think it's about $10 million more to spend on that plan as far as upgrading it. And that's going to incur the engineers, GHD, you know, have got a schedule on when they recommend these upgrades. And they're fairly, I think when they started the outfall project, everybody thought, well, gee, we're going to spend the $40 million and we're going to be out of it. Well, then all of a sudden, their plant improvements need to be met. And that's significant because we're putting things out in the ocean. And you got to make sure you have an efficient plant operation. So basically, the bottom line is that there's going to be capital outlay requirements in probably up to about mid-2025. Somewhere in that neighborhood, and then it's going to start going down. There's a hump period approaching.
It's not the same as Don's. I mean, would it make sense, given the size of our budget and everything now, to establish a rainy day fund and budget to I'll use the term, fill the coffers of that rainy day fund, rather than, because you're bumping, you're close to the top, you're borrowing max. And, you know, it's nice to see the surplus in the current general fund, and I agree it's a major change from what it was. But I mean, to me, if we're looking at these kind of expenditures, wouldn't it make sense to set something up? I think that the city taxes are unbelievably reasonable. So, I mean, I don't think that's a big issue. But my question, I guess, comes down to, would we be better anticipating the hump, if you want to use your term, anticipating the hump, and I've never seen these humps go away. They just seem to be another hump down the line.
Well, they're going to have to, because if they continue to $10 million, you know, we'd have to have a whole new revenue model.
No, but what I'm saying is, would it make sense to say, do we start establishing a rainy day fund and start putting money aside in the rainy day fund to cover, you know?
But that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm agreeing with you 100%,
Okay.
because I know that we're raising extra revenue now. So here's the risk. If we raise this revenue now through the wastewater fund, and then we turn around and spend it on something else,
Yeah.
then when it comes time to, you know, pay for these capital outlays in 2022, 23, 24, we're not going to have a source. So
And you
my
can't borrow.
recommendation is, what you're talking about is a rainy day fund, and I'm saying pretty much the same thing, and I'm talking cash money. We've got to go ahead and put this money aside and restrict it, you know.
I don't want to jump to number 7 where it says recommendations by the Audit Committee, but I think that's one of our
Yeah, I
recommendations.
think
What
we
you
should,
said?
yeah. Establish a rainy day fund and start to fund for this. I mean, God forbid it ever happened, but I can remember I was a freshman in college when that storm hit here, okay? The 62 storm.
62, yeah.
And man, I'm telling you, that, I would never want to see that again. But I mean, I think you have to look at it and say, we live in an area that is certainly susceptible to that. Plus the fact, I mean, the way I'm looking at this, and I'm praising everybody in the management for what you've done. This is not criticism in any way, shape, or form. I think at least in my dealings with the people in the city, the quality of the people is much better. They know what they're doing, which is a change. So in some cases, so I don't think this is any way. I think what you've done is fantastic. I'm not arguing that. I'm simply looking at this and saying, wait a minute, we're bumping up against our borrowing maximum. Okay, we know we've got this hump, and I'm sure we're going to have other humps. There's things nobody anticipates that are going to happen. So should we consider make a recommendation that, as Don's saying, is that there be a rainy day fund established and so much set aside. I'm on DFAC. I've been on it for a lot of years. And the odds of getting a rainy day fund, the advantage of the rainy day fund was set up in the state. Nobody could figure out how to tap it. So that's a true story. So it worked pretty well. But what they did is now they've started doing the same thing. So I think you got the political cover of saying the state's setting this up. We've got these things coming along, but we need to look at this and look at it and say, even if you increase the residential taxes, the taxes on the real estate, and say we need to have a fund set aside. We need to have a cushion. And I think it's scary. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Shannon.
So Bert and I actually just this past week were talking about restricting funds and earmarking them for certain projects or in the lines of what you're talking about. But also, I think it's important to look at this report prepared by the independent auditors on an annual basis to see that the city, although we don't have a rainy day fund, we have a specific and I'll say substantial fund balance. So, that can be reviewed and looked at. I know from working in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, a rainy day fund, also known as a stabilization fund, it was required for municipalities to set X amount aside. And that, unlike in the state of Delaware, but we do look at the fact that we're in sound fiscal position here, and we do have that fund balance, which, right, it's according to our independent auditors, substantial, and we keep an eye on that. We keep track of the budget on a regular basis, on a weekly and monthly basis. We provide a report to the mayor and commissioners on a monthly basis. And I think, as you get through this report, you'll see that annually we're pretty not only sound, but we keep track of everything, and we're in a good position. So,
Do you feel it's not needed? Do you feel that it's not needed to have a set aside?
No, so what I said is I definitely think that we need to, and Bert and I talked about this, we need to earmark or restrict some any additional funding that we do have. So it's not because, God bless the mayor and commissioners for the work that they do, but it's, easy to, try to please everyone. Some of what you see that's increased in the past, 6 to 10 years is the fact that we have, some major infrastructure improvements that are needed here. So, you as residents and us as folks who work here on a daily basis, we're involved in many, many projects that look out into the future. So my concern on a daily basis is where are we going to get the funds to do that?
That's
If we don't restrict that, if we don't lock that in for stormwater that we know is much needed, or, you know, for water main replacement. Part of the budget increase is for every year, $450,000 is earmarked towards streets and, you know, street replacement and what's underneath the street, obviously the infrastructure. So that's something that, you know, I think is very important as we move forward here.
And so here, I would make a suggestion to your, to one of the ways you can facilitate that, and we can certainly provide some examples. One of the ways to facilitate establishment of a rainy day fund or restricted fund or however you want to call it, is to establish really a working fund balance policy or even a equity policy, you know, if you want to incorporate the proprietary funds. And in that policy, now you're looking at what's our policy. Our policy is that we're going to, and some people use a % of the annual budget, some people use, you know, we will set funds aside until we reach a certain limit or until we've met X % of a long-term capital program, but you put parameters around it. And the thing that it helps is it helps to demonstrate that you're just having a fiscal policy. You're not, you know, when you say to someone, let's have a rainy day fund or a stabilization fund, which are both, they're all the same thing, right? It's all the same thing. But sometimes what can happen is the way, the politics of it, if you will, to a citizen who says, why do you have a rainy day fund, right? You should be spending my money today, you know, don't charge me anymore. So, but it is an all-encompassing way to address everything that you're saying and some of the things even that Sharon is adding on to that, which is to just say, here's how now that we have equity, we're going to be strategic about how we manage our equity, right? Not manage, we're already managing every year's budget, but we need to manage our future. And that's one of the ways to do it, is to just set those parameters in place. And then they outlive, if it's a procedure and a policy, now it outlives changes in administration, changes in governance, and it's there and it's in place, you know. And
you know
then,
what your balance is in the bank right now?
Yeah. Well, we're running, I mean, typically we're running 15, 16, 17 million dollars
In the bank.
cash. Well, it's one
I don't
indicator.
want to say that too loud.
I know,
right?
Well, see, you already have people that want to spend
Right,
that.
I know.
They don't want to.
that's what I'm saying. You have a fund balance and equity. Yeah, this is how we're managing, you know, and you don't focus on the cash position because cash is going to go up and down all the time, you know.
The
But
big thing that I think is needed, and I don't know, I think you and I talked the other day, Bert, a little bit about it. The people in Rehoboth are so used to it being so, I'll just say reasonable. And when they see a slight increase in whatever, it's like World War III happening. And I guess my point would be, if you looked at it and said, we're going to put 3% of whatever the general fund budget aside is each year until we reach such and such, or to have, and it's I would bill it as to prevent large future increases. Right. Okay, and sell it that way. I really don't think there'd be that much of a problem with it, and I may be wrong, but.
Does your $15 million in the bank mean you kind of had that, like the surplus you have here of 1.2? Is that what's happened?
Well, our cash position, it did improve this year by a few $1 million, but I think what's
Is it appropriated? Is the 15 million appropriated?
well, most of that's restricted, or I should say most of it. A huge chunk of it's restricted, water and
That's what I'm
sewer.
saying, it's appropriated, same thing.
You know,
But you
those
know
are
how
si-
much, you know how much is just sitting there unappropriated?
Well, we've got about 5 CDs, and I think the total.
He's trying to hold back on me.
So the 5 CDs that we have,
5 CDs of,
you're probably talking about $6 million in those 5 CDs.
Yeah,
But again, I can't go out.
This size, that's not a lot of money.
Oh, I know, but I mean, it
The
has,
city's, I think the city's is very well run. I mean, I want to keep saying this again. Very, very well run. I think you'll agree with me. The issue is communicating, and then the other thing is getting across that, you know, that it's just going to continue, this is going to continue to cost money. There's no way around it.
But one of the things Pam mentioned, that, and she was talking about the financial policy. We were pretty well acquainted with the finance director in Salisbury. We were business partners for many years. And they have a financial policy. So I called them a couple of weeks ago and I said, can I see that? Because in that financial policy, they're talking about hard numbers, you know, ratios and calculations on how you implement that. And I'm curious. Haven't had time to really review it, but I mean, I think what Pam's talking about, I think that would be the prudent thing to do, to have because we have no financial policy. We have an investment policy on how we can invest our surplus cash, and it's pretty conservative. But as far as a financial policy, I think.
But, I mean, I moved out of a 7,500 square foot house by Rockford Park in Wilmington about 4 years ago into a 2-bedroom, 2,300 square foot home out in Greenville, okay? The county taxes are higher than the city and county taxes combined, okay? Now, everybody could criticize Wilmington for the way they manage their money, but if you look at it and say, with all the issues Wilmington has, all right, which was a little substantial, the taxes on the real estate are far lower than the taxes are in the county. Sooner or later, the people in the county are going to wake up and say, whoa, what's going on here, right? And so, me being one of them. But anyway, what I'm getting at is that I think two things need to get across. Now, maybe we're doing this now, but I think get across to the population that the city is very well run. I mean, a lot of people think, oh my God, they're just spending money like drunken sailors, you know, they're something like this. But I mean, the city's very well run. The question then comes down to, how do we set something aside that assumes we're not going to have we have enough money set aside that we're not going to have any big tax increases coming out of the blue sometime? And you know, I really think it's very strongly it should be done, especially when I see this. I mean, I think if you tried to do it before, the amount you needed to do it would have been very, very large. Now you're looking at it from a position of strength. It's obviously up to the management of the city what they want to do.
Well, one thing that we haven't mentioned, you're talking about capital outlays. We do have a 5-year plan, and Evan Miller, project coordinator for the city, has done a really nice job of getting real specific. I mean, you look through that 5-year plan report, he's got pictures of the asset that we're going to buy or thinking about buying, and Sharon probably can tell you more about her approach, but I mean, basically, we've gone to these department heads and said, what are we going to need over the next 5 years? And I started something like that years ago. Greg wouldn't it wasn't his priority, but I think Stan Mills, to his credit, I mean, he wanted a 5-year plan, and I think we've taken it from, a pretty basic level on an Excel spreadsheet to something that's pretty comprehensive, and I think that, probably ought to get that in your hands.
And in saying that, just to add to that, last year we had an unprecedented over $5 million CIP that was brought to the budget meeting with the mayor and commissioners. As Bert said earlier, we're used to seeing maybe a $1 million CIP. So with that said, of course, with a 5-year plan, that $5 million was drastically reduced into this fiscal year and brought forward. Mayor and commissioners are still going to see it, but it's brought forward in that 5-year increment. It's still needed. Everything is in there. It's either deferred or, if something is new, it can be nixed or disregarded by the mayor and commissioners. It's their call.
But I mean, I think that if it got out to you've got to Is it on the website?
5-year plan?
Yeah.
I think it is.
Yes, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
I would make, I just think that the fact that people realize it, maybe Don agree or disagree, I just think it has to be sold, I'll put it that way, what you're talking about setting up. But I don't think it's that hard a sales job. Maybe with, I don't know the existing commissioners now at all, but,
My perspective, I hope what it does is kind of temper the urge to spend money when they see that 5-year plan.
If you told me that and Simpler didn't get reelected, but if you told me that Simpler and Carney could get that fund set up in the state of Delaware, and I've been involved in this for 25 years, I'd have told you you're crazy. You're out of your mind. It'll never happen, okay? Because of all the senators and, all the different priorities and everything like that. And Simpson laid the groundwork and didn't get reelected. But, Carney did a hell of a sales job, but they did a hell of a sales job to get I'll use, instead of commissioners, the representatives and senators to understand this has got to be done. This has to be done, okay? And I think you got perfect cover to say, we need to follow this example and get the same thing done down here. Get the same thing done here. But I think it's, I think you've done. It's amazing the change in the. I think it's amazing. Two things amazing. One is the quality of the information the city puts out, and two, just the management of the city. And I don't think anybody gets credit for it. Hope it's on TV.
Well, it's nice to hear that, but we still got a lot of things we'd like to do. And one of the things that we've talked about and we haven't is implemented is on a lot of city websites, they have these interactive financial tools where you can go in, look at the budget, and
Sorry, I didn't know this was turned on.
look at the budget and actuals and really actually play around with it, drill down to see, in some cities you could drill down to very small detail as far as what they're spending on a particular line item. And these tools are, the software that we have is called Munis, and they purchased a company called Socrata. And that's basically what they do. So the bottom line is somebody can use our website, hopefully within the coming years, where they can go there and they can really understand what the city's doing financially, as opposed to, hearing from their neighbor that we're broke or whatever, So I think we've made some strides, but there's a lot more to do.
The fact you got a website's a big improvement.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Sharon has a computer on the desk.
That's a compliment, not
I feel like we've covered all the numbers.
Right?
Okay.
So the other thing to highlight, we've talked about sort of the governmental side. You will see on the governmental statements, and I'm looking at page 18 right now. You don't need to flip if you don't want to, but you do have a capital projects fund right now, which was used to track the funding of the City Hall building and all the costs associated with it. Because that was separately segregated and because there were some overages from the initial debt that was incurred for it, that fund does currently have a deficit. So it'll be up to the city in future years to determine whether that will be funded by transfer from other funds or some other methodology. Now, all that said, even with that deficit included, you're still in a overall fund balance position where you have the opportunity, like you said, from a position of strength to establish a stabilization or a rainy day fund.
The deficit was paid from general funds again?
Primarily, yes. Yeah. The other important funds are, of course, your water and sewer fund. And I think probably the key factors there on page 21 are the change in net position for the year. You'll see this year that the water fund increased its net position by about 600,000, and the sewer fund had a decrease of about 200,000 during the year. That was primarily driven by this being the first year where interest was being paid on the ocean outfall loan, so it increased the interest expense dramatically. And then you may know that subsequent to year-end, management did make some adjustments to sewer rates, partially recognizing that in future years, that interest expense number will be a little larger, and rates would need to be adjusted accordingly. Yeah. The notes to the financial statements, which comprise the bulk of the rest of this report, are fairly consistent with last year. As I mentioned, there is some new language regarding the post-employment healthcare plan. It's primarily actuarial information, so please feel free to read that if that's of interest to you. But I think that that's primarily so that lenders and bondholders can have a greater understanding of how you compare to not only other municipal clients, but also for-profit entities and others that they may be choosing to invest in. Flipping to the single audit supplement, which begins on page 59, I mentioned that there's 2 additional reports that we prepared. The first one is on auditing in accordance with government auditing standards, and I'm pleased to report that we issued a clean, unmodified opinion. We found no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in your internal control over financial reporting. Starting on page 61 is our report on compliance for the major programs in accordance with the single audit. And here, again, we did not have any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. We did have one other matter that we reported as an other compliance matter. And this one actually wasn't really on the city, but the city kind of got stuck with the short end. Subsequent to the issuance of last year's report, the state reached out and said, oh, this loan that we gave you was actually federal money and should have been on your CFA, and had not reported that previously. So upon identifying that, the report has been modified, the prior year report reissuing to include that additional loan. Because of that, the second issuance fell outside the original timeline for submitting a data collection form to the federal government. So essentially, we had a finding that the revised data collection form was late. Again, they were not informed by the state until after the data collection form due date. So it's sort of a hard luck situation where we don't see that the city's controls did anything incorrectly. Yeah, but as far as controls over the cash being received from the state, the controls over how the money is spent, we did not find any issues. We found controls to be operating effectively. And to be honest, this is outside of the scope of our report, but we found the Munis system to be providing a lot of efficiencies and operational quality as far as the availability of data and its timeliness and accuracy.
It's just been a little struggle to get it working.
Yeah.
In fairness,
Right,
to her.
yes.
A lot of hard work on it.
It's been a tremendous amount. Munis is a very good system. It was a very good choice by the city, but it definitely is also a very challenging system. Yeah. Governmental accounting, as you know, is just not like, it's not quite as simple as a for-profit enterprise, and so the software goes along with it in terms of complexities, and so Bert continues to work very hard to get that system, but we've seen other governments struggle. We've seen them not be quite as successful, but it's just a process. Yeah. It takes time.
Yeah, and the transaction by transaction timeliness is high quality. It's getting those last sort of wraparound items put together, and I think that it sounds like management has good control over it heading into 2020. And I do, piggybacking on what Pam said, I do want to mention that I really appreciate that management is taking the time to implement Munis correctly, because we have seen a lot of governments half implement and then stop and start keeping Excel schedules to do some of the stuff, and it leads to problems down the road. So I know there's definitely been some difficulties in getting it implemented and timeliness related to that, but I think that the end product is going to be very valuable to the city.
Well, in saying that, I'd like to thank you, Jeff. I know you've spent hours with Bert, maybe not this past year necessarily, but in year 2 of the implementation, Bert was here many days, nights and weekends, and much of that time in getting Munis up to speed and actually getting the audit done, not this past year, but the previous year was with your help. So thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. Thank you. And also, let me thank you, the committee, for letting us, first for having us out, and then also for letting us sort of audible the date from Monday to Wednesday. When some circumstances came up, we really appreciate that.
As long as it's not Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock.
Deal. So
That's
at
your
this point,
report?
at this point, I'd like to open it up to any closing questions you may have.
I think we did the end
Yeah.
first. Or jumped ahead to, the 6 and 7. We had the questions and the recommendation, and then you had your report.
I like the discussion. I think that's usually the most effective. And
Jim's always raring to go.
You got the report out. Usually I get the report 3 hours before I come in here. I had it for a week, so I had read the report,
Yeah.
got it thoroughly.
Yeah.
So I didn't have any any questions on the report, which is,
Yeah, and that's definitely something we are working not only to move up the final deadline for our report meeting, but also getting a copy in your hand.
what's the
further in
magic of
advance.
it used to be a June year in. What's the magic of March?
I don't know that. You remember years ago, everybody else is June, but we
My question being,
changed
June usually worked where the year ends June 30th. You're not going to do anything until September anyway because the municipality can't do it. So you come in and do the audit in September, and then everything with the time would flow. I don't know. I never understood this March at all. I don't get it.
They changed that. I think years ago, maybe 20 years ago or more, we were a June year end.
Really?
And the city changed that to March. So it hasn't always been a March year end.
I want to change it back to June.
I wouldn't object.
I don't think that there's not the issue of, there's no issue of December or anything with the municipal. Municipal can make what they want. That would seem to make all kinds of sense because the June year end, would give, it would make your job easier because you wouldn't have the subsequent events issues that you have now. And if a June year end, you'd come in September like you do now, and it would be much easier for everybody, I would think.
Well, and the county's on a June year end, and we have issues every year where, we're on a March 31st, so I've got to provide information for our year end and the information that applies. So I'm working in 2 different fiscal years to give the county, what they need when.
But we're still, I don't mean this critically, but we're still sitting in October. We'd be sitting here in October if the year end was June, I think.
Potentially. The question is whether for this year, for instance, with the implementation of Munis, whether management would have the information ready in September or whether that would have
Well,
been.
I suppose
November,
it went a
December.
little bit further. I don't think that's an issue.
Right. There's certainly some opportunity there. I think one of the things, and I'm not sure if this was a consideration, with Rehoboth being a city that has a lot of seasonal revenue, the March year end does ensure that your summer season is in one fiscal year, as opposed to being split between the two. I'm not sure if that's a benefit or a drawback. That was when I first started working here, that was always my assumption as to why it was a March.
It was June.
Yeah.
I know it was June when I was involved.
Yeah.
I don't remember it was changed to March.
Do you have any, do you
Well, I
still?
think Jeff made a great point, though, in the sense that with the March year end, you are capturing your whole season, and your whole summer season, and really you get about 75% of your revenue between April 1st and September 15th.
But you're capturing it with June year end too. You're capturing the prior year.
Yeah, you're going to be, kind of splitting it if you do junior end.
It's up to you. I just thought it would make it easier.
Well, I wouldn't care if somebody said, well, somebody said go to a junior end.
Isn't everybody else on June?
That's the thing. There is a benefit.
Either June or December, yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Most,
Smyrna's a
December would be, even December would be good.
Newport's a December.
Village of Arden is March 24th.
Oh,
for
you're
some
March
reason.
24th. The Village of Arden is
Well,
don't even government,
Yeah.
sort
I
of.
mean,
Yeah,
it's obviously up to you. I would think the June would be easier on everybody. Maybe I'm wrong. I've been out of this for so long, it's not even,
Well, you know,
thank God I'm
it
out
can
of
be
it.
discussed. I mean, but I will say this, I've got a lot of big ticket projects.
I was gonna say, I'm not sure the cost benefit right now might just, let's finish this. And I like that modular adding to be able to have interactive. I've seen that a couple times and
Yeah.
residents like it.
Well, you know, just as an accountant, it's always a little disturbing. Sometimes, you know, we have an intelligent population, but a lot of these people are only part-time residents.
Right.
So they get bits and pieces of information and some of the information is incorrect. And I think if we had more on our website, you know, they could look at not just the audit reports, but, you know, and we are putting the budget reports, I believe, they're on the website that we prepare every month. But, you know, I think we can do a lot more to communicate financial information to people, and there are people out there that will look at it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Accept the audit and adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so
You got
Was that a
5 minutes.
vote? Was that a vote?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
much.
Thank you.
We can end
He
your audit.
looks
You got 5 minutes.
unanimous.
You got 5 minutes.
I have another meeting, but, Mr. Capone, would you be able to give me another 5 minutes? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a great winter, Jim.
Down with you in Florida, Naples, December to March.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you.